Child Protective Service workers, what was the worst case you've ever seen? Story 1. The one that hit me the hardest was before I actually started going out on my own and shadowing the after hours team. We got a call from a different state worker about a family who had moved to our state and we needed to follow up. The family had 6 kids, and the barely 12-year-old girl in the family was a registered sex offender at 12. It was heartbreaking. It was a blended family, and the mom, who was the biological parents of the girl, believed that the girl had been exposed to porn and sex by her bio dad. Anyway, one night, one of the kids said, "Girl's name, touch my penis." The parents, shocked, talked to each kid individually, and they all discussed that she had touched them. Not knowing how to handle it, they called Child Protective Services, CPS, in their state for help. CPS came out, called the cops, and for reasons that weren't clear to me, the child was placed on the registry by a judge. In my experience, usually they try inpatient and other therapies before going that route, but apparently the state and judge did things differently. So when the family moved to our state, we had to go out to make sure the family was following adequate guidelines. For example, the girl was not allowed to be alone with her siblings. She couldn't swim in the pool at the same time as her siblings. She couldn't go to school or the park or birthday parties because, well, she was a sex offender. Her siblings couldn't have friends over either. She was such a sweet kid, and it was really such a sad situation. She told us she wanted to be a fashion designer, and her favorite thing to do was play Xbox with her siblings. All the kids were in therapy, and they appeared to harbor no ill will toward her. I think about this case a lot, and I always wonder what happened to their family. Story 2. I got a good one. Well, not good, you know what I mean. Back in my mid to late 20s, I worked as a Child Protective Service agent. Specifically, I was the type to be sent out to scope out living areas to see if it was suitable for the child. I think the worst living situation I've seen was this. So I get called to this place. The report states that the house this family is living in isn't suitable for the child. It's pretty vague, as they tend to be on my end, so I go to the place. It's a really small house in the middle of nowhere, Texas. This house looked like it had been abandoned for the last 100 years or so. It was essentially just the husk of a house, rotting wood, barely stable. There isn't really a front door or front wall, so I let myself in. I'm really confused now because there's no way anyone could be living here, right? There are no cars, no signs of life. So I decide to walk around the outside of the house to make sure. In the distance, I can see something that doesn't look like it belongs in a Texas desert. I walk towards it, a good mile away. I get closer and notice that it's a tent. Actually, it's 3 tents all next to each other. Crappy tents at that. There's a bicycle leaning against one of them that's missing a wheel. There's trash everywhere, mostly beer cans and cigarette butts. There are also plenty of food wrappers, hypodermic needles, and what appears to be used toilet paper. The area smells atrocious, and I approach the front of the biggest tent and can hear people's voices coming from it. The voices have thick southern accents, and they sound weak, for lack of a better word. I can only make out 2 distinct voices, and they both sound like adults. I stand in front of the tent and just say, "Hello? Anybody home?" I understandably scared them because I hear, "What the hell?" coming from the inside of the tent. A very skinny-looking man, likely in his late 20s, unzips the tent. He's completely naked and is holding a small, beat-up kitchen knife. He looks high out of his mind. He then asks very politely, "Who the hell are you?" From inside the tent, I can see that there's a woman crouched in the corner of the tent, also high out of her mind. I couldn't tell if she was fully conscious, but the baby she was nursing certainly was. I said, "Hello, my name is the agent name, and I work with City Youth Protection Services. I've been called here about a poor living situation regarding children. Sir, do you have any children here with you?" I'm extremely scared at this point, and I'm in the middle of the desert, and the only item of self-defense I have is a taser. I try to keep my composure, though. He lowers his knife and steps out of the tent, still completely naked. He said, "Hell, man, thought you were here with the government to take my kids and guns away. I'll give you a tour of the place if you want." I'm dumbfounded at this point, but I follow him as he walks over to unzip one of the other tents. Inside, I see 2 children. One is unresponsive, laying down in the corner of the tent and looking to be around 5 or 6 years old. The other one looks to be around 8 or 9 and is laying in the other corner playing with a tape Walkman without a tape or headphones in it. These were obsolete even back when this happened. I asked him if it was okay to ask his kids a few questions. He said, "They don't talk much, but sure." I poked my head into the tent and asked the kid playing with the Walkman and asked, "Hey, what's your name?" He doesn't answer. I asked his assumed father if it's alright if I tap him on the shoulder to get his attention. He said sure, so I did. The kid looked at me with a blank expression on his face. I can immediately tell that this kid has severe developmental problems. I ask, "Hey friend, what's your name?" He doesn't respond. I then tap the other kid who's laying face down on a blanket. He turned over and his face was completely covered in bruises. Looked like he straight up went through a fight club. I asked him what his name was. He said, Devin. I asked him where all of the bruises came from. He looked at his dad, then went back to going face down into the blanket and started sobbing. I couldn't get his attention anymore. I stood up from the tent and looked at the father. I asked him what was in the other tent. We started walking over to it, and as we did, I noticed this horrible smell coming from it. He unzipped it and I saw a girl who couldn't have been older than 4. There's a corner of the tent that is lower than the rest of it, and it's full of urine. Like to ground level, just full of urine. She's in the corner of the tent playing with some dolls. I stand up and tell the man that I'll be right back, just have to grab something from my car. I return to my car and call the local police. I tell them whom I am and what the situation is. They asked if I felt safe stalling until the police showed up. I said yes. I talked to the father about not much in particular. I asked him why he thought the government was coming for his kids and his guns. He went on this long, incoherent rant about how ever since he moved here, he feared that he was going to lose his guns. I asked him where he kept the guns, and he said he kept them under the floorboards in the rotting house. Around this time, the police showed up. 3 patrol cars full of cops drove out to the tents. The man didn't even turn around or notice until one of the officers told us to put our hands up and drop to our knees. They get processed and the kids get put in foster care, and as it turns out, the couple were biological siblings and heavy meth/heroin/crack users. Reply: this guy didn't realize you were the government when you came up? Yep, was high. Glad things didn't escalate though. Story 3. It was one of the first cases I investigated, but it involved a child's death. There was actually another worker assigned to take the Priority 1 P1 case that day, but she was stuck out in the boonies working another emergency when we got the call. A 2-year-old child had been brought to the emergency room by her mother. The child was cold and blue and she had a living sister around 3 years old. I had just been cleared to take P1s and my unit supervisor sent me to start working on the case. She also called the region to send us a special investigator, a CPS investigator with police or military experience. They have special privileges in their work. By the time we got to the report, the police were already questioning the mother. It was my first time witnessing a police interrogation. The mother refused to speak English during the interview. She had her friend translate for us. For some reason, there wasn't a Spanish to English translator brought on for the interrogation. Anyway, the mom claims the child had been jumping on the bed with her sister when she fell off the bed and hit her head on the floor. She was vomiting later in the evening, and when the mom checked in on her the next day, the child was dead. Super sketchy, as preliminary reports showed no head injuries. We went to the house to investigate the scene with the police, and the mom and everything had been stripped bare, all the furniture and family possessions gone. It smelled strongly of bleach too. It was the first time I had a close look at the mom. She had bruising on her neck, a huge and fresh bruise under her chin, and her eye was swollen. She claimed she slipped and hit her chin on the kitchen counter. Anyway, in the following days, we learned the truth. A year prior, Child Protective Services investigated the family when it came out that the mom's boyfriend was abusing the children, pulling their hair out, slapping them, etc. The department required the mom to end her relationship with the boyfriend, which she did, and provided therapeutic services for the family. But a few months after CPS left, the boyfriend came back home. The night of the 2-year-old's death, she messed her pants up while her boyfriend was watching a sports game. He got angry and kicked her in the stomach, but he kicked her in the stomach so hard it almost lacerated her liver in 2. The mom was correct in that the child had been vomiting and sick the night before her death. This child spent her last hours on earth suffering a painful death. The mom had waited so long to take the little girl to the hospital because she wanted to give the boyfriend the lead time to escape. He ended up going to Mexico, where he was later found, brought back, and charged with his crime. Both he and the mom are now in prison. The little girl's big sister was reunited with their biological father, who had been spending the past few years trying to find the girls. He was inconsolable with the news. It was, by far, the worst case I have ever worked. Child death cases always are. As an employee with CPS, your job is to protect children, and when you work a case with a dead child, you feel so useless, so helpless. Story 4. Never worked for CPS or the like, but there's a kid I've always wondered about for a long time. When I was pregnant with my first spawn over a decade ago, there was a girl who often had appointments around the same time as me. She was always there with what I assume were her mother and grandmother, and if that girl was a day over 11 years old, I'd be taken aback. She was so little and massively pregnant. She didn't even have breasts when I saw her, and she still wore bright, simple kid clothes and glittery shoes. I'll always wonder how the hell she ended up pregnant so young and how life has turned out for her thus far. Story 5. Not a CPS worker, but my mom was a foster parent and ran a daycare out of the home, so we've known the specifics and assisted on a number of cases. One foster case was a child that was placed with us for about a week. He was a tiny little baby, and despite being in high school, I work up to feed him. The mother was a teenage pregnancy who was abandoned by her parents for said pregnancy and simply didn't know how to care for a baby. CPS was really understanding and gave her classes, and then when she learned how often a baby actually needed to be fed, she got her child back. She reached out to us and thanked us for everything, and we got regular updates. The child is 2 now, very happy and loved. And another case where we called CPS, a mother brought her 4 kids to our daycare, her oldest son and 3 daughters. Their oldest son was 7 and did most of the care for his younger siblings, ranging from 2 to 5 in age. Mother was pregnant, again, when she was obviously below the poverty line. The baby was born. Her kids got progressively dirtier and dirtier, to the point my mom reached out to a Facebook group for clothing donations for the kids. They would get dropped off, she would bathe them all, and dress them again. She made excuses for the mother, which she says now is her biggest regret. She just kept saying this is her 5th child and she's a single mom and a new baby. It's hard. Then we had to care for the baby. Sickly, crapping blood. After 3 days with him, my mom called CPS. We were never told what happened with them, but I remember they came to pick up some things, and I remember looking out our front window and seeing them in the worker's car all crying. It's hard, but you know it's better for them in the end. Story 6. Not a caseworker, but worked at a foster care agency for a while. Craziest case I heard about involved a kid that was very difficult to place because he had a bad habit of stealing cars, with a long rap sheet that was entirely stealing cars. The foster family he was placed with had their car stolen by him twice and had a meeting with a caseworker about it. Well, while the caseworker was there, the kid managed to sneak out and steal the caseworker's car. He drove it to the park because he had decided he wanted to go to the park. The kid was 9. I'm pretty sure they moved him to a group home after that. Story 10. I'm not a CPS worker, but I worked in criminal investigations for the Army for a number of years, and I worked very closely with CPS on our child abuse neglect cases. One particular case sticks out with me 5 years later. We received a call around 1700, which would be around 5 o'clock, and usually a good indicator that we're going to be responding to a legit call. The bad ones always seem to come in right before we head home for the evening. The call came in from CPS. They had received a call from a soldier's unit. The soldier, the husband, was in the field for training exercises and had gotten a very vague emergency call from his wife that she was having some medical problems. Husband asked his unit to send somebody to go check on his wife to make sure she was okay. Too easy. The unit sends a guy over who finds the wife in the kitchen covered in blood from the waist down in her underwear. He also notices a blood trail from a back room into the kitchen and foyer area. There is a bloody spatula on the counter. What's more is that there are animal feces and trash covering the entirety of the house, save for walking paths. There are 2 small children crying from somewhere in the back of the house. This dude immediately makes 2 calls, one back to his command and one to CPS. Command notifies the husband, who is immediately sent home. The command also calls us. We receive this call after the one from CPS. CPS reports the same story. They also inform us that the CPS worker who responded to the house had to call for help because they threw up from the smell of the house before they even got inside. So we respond. We observe exactly what was initially reported. The sight is unimaginable if you've never seen something like it. The smell was something between death and landfill. We wore Tyvek suits to move around the house. When we finally get the wife cleaned up, she tells us that while using the bathroom, she had a very early-term miscarriage. She states that she had no idea what to do, so she grabbed the spatula from the kitchen and scooped the miscarriage into some diapers and towels. She then put everything into the freezer. Her intent was to keep them until her husband came home and then decide what to do. Craziness of this aside, CPS and law enforcement have now seen the conditions of this house. After hospital visits and making sure everyone is physically and mentally healthy, we hear back to the house with CPS to see what we're actually looking at. Two-story townhouse, the entire house was covered in trash, food, dishes, clothing, etc., and animal feces. The dining table was covered with dirty dishes and rotting food. The food in the fridge was expired and moldy. There was no sitting room on the couch in the living room. The master bedroom had a queen bed, no sheets. The mattress had a dark brown stain covering over half the mattress, not positive for blood. Never figured out what the hell it was. The kids only had mattresses on the floor, no other furniture in their rooms. Clothing, trash, and feces were all over the floor. The bathrooms, I've seen truck stop restrooms that were cleaner. The list of disgusting things in this house goes on. CPS gave them 3 weeks to fix this atrocity or the kids would be removed. During that time, both husband and wife get into more legal trouble. Not to detract from the story, but their charges included drugs and prostitution. CPS finally was able to get the kids out of that home. I never learned if the parents regained custody, but I pray they didn't. It was the absolute worst imaginable house I've ever seen. The smell just stuck to your clothes. Housing said the only way the house would be safe to live in again would be if it were completely torn down, not to mention the crazy parents. Story 11. I'm a CPS investigator, so I'm the front line of all the allegations. Here's some background just so you understand what my obligations are. Our state splits it up into 2 divisions, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and the State Police, which have their own division. The state police get the worst allegations such as sexual abuse, immersion, severe physical abuse, and infant deaths. DHS gets the more run-of-the-mill like cuts, bruises, welts, striking a child on the face or the head, and any kind of neglect, whether that's medical, educational, environmental. I work for DHS. And here's the kicker, the state police can't do a removal. So if they feel a child is unsafe, they have to call us and we reassess, then make a removal based on our decision. So the worst case I've worked on is a case of neglect in which the 10-year-old female was in the custody of her legal father. He was on cocaine. Even when he met me for scheduled interviews, he was high on cocaine. In itself, that's just terrible. But after every meeting, he'd pick up and move so that I couldn't relocate. The final meeting he has with my supervisor while I attempt to locate the juvenile in order to take custody. He gets the gist of what's going on and has a friend pick the girl up from school and tells us he's having her sent to her aunt's home. But she never shows. Then he drops off too. Then he starts texting my work cell saying crap like, "I'll kill everyone before I let you take her." And remember, he's high on cocaine. Finally, after 3 full days, I find her hiding under one of his friend's beds. He's arrested for fleeing and finds out this man is out on bond for taking a knife to the man who he thought called in the report. So I take custody of the child and have a hair follicle done. She tested significantly positive for cocaine as if she ingested it herself as it was processed through her liver. What the hell? The only good thing is that she went to her aunt's home who had a clean background and is safe. The girl just thought she was on an adventure with her dad. The worst case I've seen was a secondary response for the state police in order to do a removal. 8-month-old girl was being watched by her mother's boyfriend. The mom drove rigs for a living, so she was gone for long periods of time. The baby pissed off the man enough that he dipped her. We call it baby dipping. It's a thing. Prepare yourself. He got water boiling and put it in the tub, then put the baby in the water. She had extensive burns over 70% of her body. That baby is going to have those scars forever. And to put yourself there, he got pissed off, put water to boil, and waited for it to get hot. Waited all that time knowing what the hell he was going to use it for, and then did it. Heard her screaming and then took her to his Podunk Regional Hospital. She had to be transported to the state's Children's Hospital. Then someone else had to call her mother and tell her what her boyfriend did to her daughter. And the worst part is, you get used to all of that. Story 12. First case I went on during training. Showed up at a house in a trashy town and instantly we are verbally assaulted by an obese, belligerent lady. This was mom, and she was being accused of neglecting her children by not caring for their hygienic needs and not having any food. We tell her we need to chat with the kids alone, but she refuses and stands by as we start talking. She keeps interrupting and yelling whenever we ask anything. My trainer calls the cops because she can tell the situation is escalating quickly and we need to talk to the kids. Cops show up, mom sort of calms down, and we get to chat with the kids. The teenage boy is pissed and refuses to tell us anything useful. Two younger sisters, 8 to 11-ish, don't say much, but they didn't need to say anything. Two little girls have nits in their hair so bad their scalp is bald and irritated on the back of their heads below their ears. Their hair has matted and basically one big dreadlock. These were white people, so matting the hair like that is hard. When it's clear that the tide is turning against the mom, she yells at the kids to run away and they follow orders. We spend the next hour trying to find the kids and then trying to get them away from the mom who has huddled them into a neighbor's yard in a corner. We get the kids back to a foster care agency office, but no family was available to take the kids, and this was when my heart broke. The workers sit the girls on a chair over a large plastic sheet, start removing the nits with a knit brush and a hairbrush. I watch as hundreds and hundreds of dead living nits fall to the plastic under the girls, and they start to cry because it hurts. The workers were as gentle as possible, but they had to have been infested for months, if not longer. This was when I finally totally broke down and I left the room and had to collect myself. Mind you, this is around 11 p.m. It turned out the mom had significant mental health needs she wasn't caring for and had been ignored by her family for years, so no one knew what was going on. School officials claimed they didn't notice anything, but we suspected the kids weren't coming to school like that anyway. Story 13. I was fortunate in that I never had to deal with a child's death, but the case that still haunts me is an 11-year-old girl in a psychiatric hospital after having hallucinations and suicidal ideations. Her family's case file was over 2 inches thick. Her grandfather molested her when she was a toddler. Later on, she was molested by the nice, friendly neighbor whom her father asked to pick her up from school, who just happened to be a registered sex offender. When I got her case, she was peeping on her much younger half-brother in addition to the hallucinations and thoughts of suicide. Her father was a lousy piece of crap who couldn't be asked to actually work and provide for his family, and her stepmother hated her. At one point, I almost had her father persuaded to place her in a wonderful group home, but then he changed his mind. I'll never forget when he called me and proudly told me he'd spent 4 hours on the phone, but finally found a charity that would pay for his daughter's prescriptions. I tried to get her out of that home. We couldn't offer any services because, as evidenced by the 2-inch thick file, their family had every service available and nothing had changed. I reviewed it with my supervisor and legal, and they would not approve it because she wasn't in immediate danger. So it wasn't a problem that she was molesting her younger brother, and her suicidal thoughts didn't consist of immediate danger. I dream about her every once in a while, and I wonder if she's still alive. Story 14. I was a case manager for CPS. I had a toddler on my caseload who came into care because of a severe beating that left her with a skull fracture and 2 broken femur bones. She was in a full-body cast. She was in medical foster care. The mission of the agency was to have children reunify with their parents, so the parents had to complete a case plan and attend court hearings. It took a while, but the parents completed the case plan and the child was reunified. During this time, mom became pregnant again with a baby boy. She delivered around the same time the reunification occurred. The parents found the baby boy dead one morning. He was 6 weeks old and the same age his sister was when she came into care, and he had had the same injuries. Before the reunification and the birth, I did everything I could to prevent either child from going back to that house. I even begged and cried in court. Dad was a suspect, but there was not enough evidence. He was a true monster. I waited 2 weeks, put in my notice, walked out.